Hello, and welcome back to Bedtime Stories with Vice Vice Baby, where we will continue good stories for great holidays. The Capture of Fort Ticonderoga by Washington Irving, adapted. Some bold spirits in Connecticut conceived the project of surprising the old forts of Ticonderoga and Crown Point, already famous in French War. Their situation on Lake Champlain gave them the command to the main route to Canada, so that the possession of them would be all important in case of hostilities. They were feebly garrisoned and negligently guarded, and abundantly furnished with artillery and military stores so needed by the Patriot Army. At this juncture, Ethan Allen stepped forward, a patriot, and volunteered with his Green Mountain Boys. He was well fitted for the enterprise. During the border warfare over the New Hampshire grants, he and his lieutenants had been outlawed by the legislature of New York and rewards offered for their apprehension. He and his associates had armed themselves, set New York at defiance, and had sworn they would be the death of anyone who should try to arrest them. Thus, Ethan Allen had become a kind of Robin Hood among the mountains. His experience as a frontier champion, his robustness of mind and body, and his fearless spirit made him a most desirable leader in the expedition against Fort Ticonderoga. Therefore, he was appointed at the head of the attacking force. Accompanied by Benjamin Arnold and two other officers, Allen and his party of soldiers, who had been enlisted from several states, set out and arrived at Shoreham, opposite Fort Ticonderoga, on the shore of Lake Champlain. They reached the place at nighttime. There were only a few boats on hand, but the transfer of men began immediately. It was slow work. The night wore away, day was about to break, and but 83 men, with Allen and Arnold, had crossed. Should they wait for the rest to cross over, day would dawn, the garrison wake, and their enterprise might fail. Allen drew up his men, addressed them in his own empathetic style, and announced his intention of making a dash at the fort without waiting for more force. "It is a desperate attempt," said he, "and I ask no man to go against his will. I will take the lead and be the first to advance. You that are willing to follow, poise your firelocks." Not a firelock but was poised. They mounted a hill briskly, about in silence, guided by a boy from the neighborhood. The day dawned as Allen arrived at a sally port. A sentry pulled trigger on him, but his piece missed fire. He retreated through a covered way. Allen and his men followed. Another sentry thrust at an officer with his bayonet, but was struck down by Allen, and begged for quarter. It was granted on condition of his leading the way instantly to the quarters of the commandant, Captain Delaplace, who was yet in bed. Being arrived there, Allen thundered at the door and demanded a surrender of the fort. But this time, his followers had formed into two lines on the parade ground and given 3 hearty cheers. The commandant appeared at the door, half dressed, the frightened face of his pretty wife peering over his shoulder. He gazed at Allen in bewildered astonishment. "By whose authority do you ask?" exclaimed he. "In the name of Continental Congress," replied Allen, with a flourish of his sword, and an oath which we do not care to subjoin. There was no disputing at this point. The garrison, like the commandant, had been startled from sleep, and made prisoners as they rushed forth in their confusion. A surrender accordingly took place. The captain and 48 men who composed his garrison were sent prisoners to Hartford, in Connecticut. And thus, without a loss of a single man, one of the important forts, commanding the main route to Canada, fell into the hands of the Patriots. Washington and the Cowards by Washington Irving, adapted. During the evacuation of New York by Washington, two divisions of the enemy encamped on Long Island, one British under Sir Henry Clinton, the other Hessian under Colonel Dinop. Emerged in boats from the deep wooded recesses of Newtown Inlet, and, under cover of the fire from the ships, began to land at 2 points between Turtle and Kip's Bay. The breastwork were manned by Patriot militia who had recently served in Brooklyn. Disheartened by their late defeat, they fled at the first advance of the enemy. 2 brigades of Putnam's Connecticut troops, which had been sent that morning to support them, caught in the panic, and, regardless of the commands and entreaties of their officers, joined in the general scamper. At this moment, Washington, who had mounted his horse at the first sound of the cannonade, came galloping to the scene of the confusion. Riding in among the fugitives, he endeavored to rally and restore them to order. All in vain. At the first appearance of 60 or 70 redcoats, they broke again without firing a shot, and fled in headlong terror. Losing all self-command at the sight of such dastardly conduct, Washington dashed his hat upon the ground in a transport of rage. "Are these the men," exclaimed he, "with whom I am to defend America?" In a paroxysm of passions and despair, he snapped his pistol at some of them, threatened others with his sword, and was so heedless of his own danger that he might have fallen into the hands of the enemy, who were not 80 yards distant, and had not an aide-de-camp seized the bridle of his horse and absolutely hurried him away. It was one of the rare moments of his life when the vehement element of his nature was stirred up from its deep recesses. He soon recovered his self-possession and took measures against the general peril. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Bedtime Stories with Vice Baby. I hope you'll have a good night and sweet dreams.